Hi, hello, welcome to another episode of Man with a Mentor. I am the man, your host, Matthew Barnard, and you may be wondering what a show called Man with a Mentor may be about. And basically, it's about me finding people who have a passion for what they want to do with their lives and their careers, and they just don't let it go until they get what they want. And that's important, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah, you got to be happy with what you're doing every day.
Absolutely. Couldn't agree more.
Exactly. And this guy is speaking, but I haven't introduced him yet, and I should. So Daniel Wiley is a notable young conductor on the rise, having made appearances with the Cincinnati Symphony, Cincinnati Ballet, Nashville Symphony, Kansas City Symphony, and Calgary Philharmonic. And in 2020, he created the Windsor Symphony Orchestra's Digital Education Concert Series. And speaking of education, Daniel has a BM in Music Education from Boise State University and an MM in Orchestral Conducting from University of North Texas.
That's a mouthful.
Summing up, I know. Try saying Cincinnati that many times.
I know. Well, listen, when you live there,
Right.
Cincinnati,
The Sin City. No, should be. It's not, though. So I just mentioned a lot of places: Cincinnati, Texas, Boise, Kansas City, Canada. Like, you're around.
All over the place. And
Right.
we, I used to make a joke with my family that every time I got a new gig, I'd move to a new time zone. So I'm originally from the Los Angeles area.
Oh, right.
And so I sort of made my way West Coast, Mountain Time, Central, East Coast, and now I'm sort of based in the East Coast. But yeah, I'm jet setting all over the place, which is really exciting. But I think in the past 3 months I've been home a total of 4 or 5 days. Maybe a week it's been a lot on the road for sure.
Wow. Do you want to tell us why that is, or what your family life was like, or was it stable and you're loving being all over the place, or what was it like?
Yeah, I think a couple of things. One, as a performer, well, I have a multitude of jobs. I think maybe let's start there. Is that first? I work with the Cincinnati Symphony full time, so that's actually my main gig, and I live in Cincinnati. But I also work for the Kansas City Symphony part-time, and then I have my own orchestra in North Carolina, just north of Charlotte, and that's also part-time. So I'm usually flying between those other two orchestras and then other orchestras that I guess conduct. And part of the reason for all of the traveling is when you're a performer, well, it's just like actually any other performer, is that you take your show on the road, right? And so it's really beneficial not only for me as an artist to go to different communities and see how the arts are impacting them, but also important for my own artistic development, because each orchestra is its own unique organism, has its own identity. And so as a conductor, our job is to help make a space where that orchestra can be as successful as possible. And so your approach to each orchestra has to be slightly different depending on the people that are in front of you. So
You don't just bring in a bullwhip and a, this is how it goes.
Well, no,
me.
sometimes it's, and not every show is the same. It's some shows it's really fast. You only have one rehearsal, and the job is you just need to tick off the boxes, make sure you're good to go, and then perform. And then other shows, it's really about, especially when you're the music director, like I am in Salisbury, North Carolina, it's really about, okay, how can we work on our artistic development of these musicians and really sort of get to the core of this music? So there are a lot of factors there. Family life for me growing up, both sets of parents were teachers, and actually that's why I became a teacher. It's kind of in my bones. But there's sort of two sides of me. There's the nurturer side, which the teaching fulfilled perfectly. And then there was this artistic side, and I got into teaching. I taught for 2 years, and then I said, you know what, the artist in me needs more. And that's when I took the next step and went and got my master's in orchestral conducting, and then started this journey to where I am now.
Oh, wow. So let's talk more about education.
Let's do it.
So how did you get your start like in music? Did someone like give you a piano when you were 3, or like, and to be a conductor, do you have to be like a master of all trades, like have a deep understanding of brass and woodwinds and percussion and all that? Do you have to kind of know a little bit about all of them, or do you not really have to know much about any of them and it's about the music? Or what was your path of learning?
Yeah, I think the short answer is yes. The long answer, the long answer is the first part of your question. My grandmother was the only other musician in the family, and she didn't force me into music. She just always left the piano lid open, and I gravitated towards it. My brother did not. My brother's a pilot, and so he wanted nothing to do with the piano. He thought it was boring and uninteresting. He'd rather, ask about the bolts on the plane. Fine.
Oh, right.
In terms of, being a
In some ways, though, he's conducting a plane, though. Like it's a
oh,
similar,
absolutely,
like,
it's a leadership role, but he's a naval aviator, so he's a fighter jet pilot. So he lands on carriers for a living. So every time I think that my job is stressful, I remember that I don't have to land a multi-million-dollar jet on a multi-billion-dollar aircraft. Like it's perspective.
And it looks
great
like
for
it's
me.
like 8 feet. But I'm sure it's longer, but it seems scary.
Yeah,
to me.
it's scary. I think, and well, don't ever tell him this, but he's really cool for doing it. So, and for making that work. But for me, well, I think maybe since we're on the topic, we both have this sense of leadership and drive, and both roles that we have come into in our professional lives involve something around that leadership role. And that actually leads perfectly into the second part of your question, which is, do I need to know all of the instruments? And does that, or is it something that's music driven? And for me, the answer is absolutely. You need to have a working knowledge of all of the instruments, mainly because when you speak to these musicians, not only do you have to offer something to them musically, but you also have to understand how the method of sound production works, right? And that can affect how fast the music goes, how quietly or loudly they can play, and what sort of colors you can get from different instruments, right? Like we talk a lot about, let's say with string players, you can play sort of really into the string and you get sort of this really lush, beautiful sound, or you can play really lightly with almost no pressure and you get this sort of, I like to call it tissue paper sound. You can almost see through the sound. And so understanding how the instruments function that way helps you unlock the musical part. Now with every orchestra, like I mentioned earlier, they're all different organisms and they all need different layers of, is it music led or is it technically led? So if I'm working with either a younger orchestra, like a youth orchestra, or maybe a smaller professional orchestra, we might have more conversations that are technique oriented, like strings, if you could use a little less bow and a little more, this is the sound quality. Whereas when you start working with some of the world-class orchestras that I've worked with, a lot of what you're getting at is you just describe the sound world and the inspiration, and they translate that into, let's do this on the instrument. And so there's a subtle shift in how you deliver the information between various orchestras, but absolutely having a working knowledge at minimum of pretty much all of the instruments is essential.
Right. I was going to ask about like small orchestras versus big orchestras. Like, is it, if you have a 30-piece orchestra versus a 300-piece orchestra, or however, what's a big one? What's the
Yeah, well,
I forget. I don't know.
Well, so let me clarify. By small, I mean usually in the orchestra industry world, we talk small. We talk in terms of budget size. So small, we will say an orchestra that has a small budget versus an orchestra that has a large budget. But to your question, there's actually an interesting thread there in that. Large orchestras, which typically range, it's usually dependent upon the piece of music you're doing, will range between, let's say, 90 and 120-ish musicians on stage. You remember, you got to fit them all on stage.
Right.
And if you have a chorus, it's even more than that, right?
Right.
Versus a small, which might be anywhere from 13 up to, wherever, 30. Oftentimes, we have conversations in larger orchestras where we direct them to play more like a smaller, what we call a chamber orchestra. And the reason for that is that in order to play chamber music, you have to have a real sense of communication with the other individuals in the ensemble, and it's a little more tight-knit. Oftentimes there isn't a conductor, so there's a lot of relying on what I like to call body English, where you're like sort of breathing sympathetically with each other just to help stay together. And we oftentimes apply that concept to a larger orchestra, mainly because there are so many more people and the distance is wider that we're trying to encourage them to really sort of make that connection, even though they're in a further position from each other.
Right. Oh my gosh. Yeah. I mean, you would kind of think it would be harder to wrangle like 100 people, but but if you've got a small number of people and someone just isn't on board with what you're saying, does that make it like difficult? Because you can't have like Fred blend in with the other 8 clarinets,
not
you
Fred.
know?
Not Fred.
Whereas like
No,
Fred is the only clarinet player and he's not doing what you want him to do. Like, is that tricky? Do you boot Fred? What happens to Fred?
That's on the next episode. We'll discover what happens to Fred. No,
You Game of Thrones?
yeah, well, right. Oh my goodness. Well, maybe. No, the real reality is that the thing they don't teach you about in conducting school, because I went to school to learn how to be a conductor, is that it's not just about trying to be the most potent musician in the room, the one who's got something to bring to the ensemble, but it's also about having almost like a psychology degree. Because for me personally, my job, my role that I view in, is it's my job to create a space where everyone in the room can be the artist that they are. It's my job to create that environment for them. So if you have an individual who we'll say Fred is not playing nice, or he's not blending with the ensemble, it's my job to address it. Now, how I address it will depend on Fred's personality. And so whether, Fred needs, maybe Fred is very insecure about his playing. And so the way that I have to deliver that information has to take that into account. This is my philosophy. I mean, you could ask 5 other conductors and you might get a different philosophy. Some might say, no, I've
got 4 more in the hall. So
okay,
let's just
perfect. Just line them up. It'll be a cavalcade of conductors.
Right.
And no, so for me, it's about, okay, so this musician needs me to help create a space for them to be successful. And so, and also their success is our success, right? So, yeah. So again, it depends on the person. Maybe Fred needs something that's very direct, and that's what will work. Or maybe it's that all Fred needs is hey, take a look at that bar, and then you just leave it there, and that was enough. That they go, oh, he said something. I'll work on it next time. The gestures from a conductor. The best way that I can describe it is it's kind of like the most complicated game of charades that you've ever played, except everybody has the answer on the paper. So for example, if the answer is triangle, right? My job is to show you triangle. I mean, I'm explaining this in a metaphor, right? Okay, it's triangle, but my real job is actually to say, what kind of triangle is it? Is it a blue triangle? Is it an equilateral triangle? Is it an isosceles triangle? How big is this triangle? And so it's more akin to that. So the world-class orchestras, they don't need to know when to play, or not even so much how to play or who comes in or where. They need the why to play. They need the why, and the why is usually related either to, it could be the space that you're performing in. So we're going to take this a little slower because of the hall, and it'll sound like all the sounds will sort of blend together because there's a lot of reverb in the hall. It could be that the oboe finishes a line and the violins, you take the line from the oboe. And what's important is not that the oboe ends and the violins begin, but rather the violins begin because the oboe ended, right? That it's a continuation of that line and helping them understand that why. And so as I've worked with orchestras of all level, it really is that variation of how much why do we need. Why is always what we're trying to get to. And then when you get to, either less experienced orchestras or youth orchestras, you get into a little more of the like how. And so the movement that you see is not only structural, but there is also some meaning behind it. So it's not only you play here, but here's how you play, and then most importantly, here's why you're playing.
Oh, so there's a lot more
I've thought
going
about
on.
it for a little bit.
There's a lot more going on than just a baton and arms playing and
It is in
flailing.
fact an art form unto itself.
Right. Is that part of your being taught, like the skills of those motions and?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, it's actually pretty formulaic. The most basic pattern we have is a 4 pattern if music's in 4, and you just go down, and you come over across your body, you go out, and then you go up, and you have 4. 1, 2, 3, 4.
I have a question though about being a conductor, because I feel like as soon as they walk on the stage, and I haven't been in a lot of rooms with orchestras when the conductor walks in and it's not on stage, but it seems like all of a sudden there's a hush and there's like it's about to start and so does that happen in rehearsals? Are you like the revered one in the room? Are you just one of the gang, or like are you friendly with them? Is there like a weird boss, like employee barrier?
It depends on the orchestra, I find, and it depends on the conductor. And it's a relationship, okay, like anything else. And you can often tell what the status of that relationship by how the musicians respond to the conductor. If you've got musicians who are really giving it their all, oftentimes it's because they have a lot of respect for the conductor, they have a lot of respect for the other musicians they're making. Hopefully, above all of that, would be their respect for the music that they're playing. That's kind of the most important thing. But to your point about rehearsals, me personally, I always like coming in early before rehearsals and being on stage and just talking with the musicians. I mean, they're people, right? And if my, I mean, but
maybe not Fred, maybe not.
Maybe not. Well, Fred's on the naughty list. No, but. No, I mean, by that I mean that for me, the most important part of my job is to, like I said, to create that space for them to be the greatest artists they can be. And there's no way that I can do that without knowing them a little bit, knowing about what they're passionate about, knowing about maybe, they've had a really, really tough day. They're human beings.
Right.
And maybe today is not the day that I go after Fred and say, you know what, Fred? You need to get your act together, because maybe Fred's having a day, right?
Right.
And so you say, okay, well, maybe not today with Fred, and maybe we understand that that's where Fred is today, and that's fine.
Right.
Yeah.
Let Fred off the hook.
Well, or maybe just give Fred the space that he needs to collect his thoughts before we begin rehearsal,
Right.
instead of being omnipresent.
Are musicians ever wanting to break into being conductors, or is it a totally different skill set? Or
Well, you have to be one first.
yeah, like is it both sides of like the same coin, or do most musicians be like, I'm so glad I'm not that conductor guy, or are they like, oh, I wish I was the conductor, why didn't I do that? Or,
Yeah, yes to all of it. Yes to all of it. There are musicians who would say, absolutely not, I don't want that responsibility. That's way too much. I love playing my instrument. But the bigger piece of that is that every conductor has to be a musician. And oftentimes we like to talk about being the greatest musician you can, who happens to have an outlet that is different. So what I mean by that is, for me, my goal in life is to be the best musician I can who happens to be a conductor, versus a conductor who happens to be a musician.
What about, I'm going to ask this in the same way. What about composing? Do you think conductors all want to be composers and create their own music, or
It's
not
the
at
same.
all?
It's the same.
It's
Same as the yeah. And
some
actu-
no.
Yeah, and actually, I started off wanting to be a composer, and I discovered that that was not the outlet that set my soul on fire.
Okay.
Waving my arms and yelling at Fred was.
Right. Let's talk about the WSO's Digital Education Concert Series that started at the pandemic.
Yeah.
And what that was and what you did, and is it still going, and what do you want to do with it? Or
Well, so it was in fact my pandemic project that when we all were figuring out how we could still stay connected, and I learned so much about video editing and filming that I never thought I wanted to know, and about how to use Premiere Pro to edit stuff together. And we all musicians, we all learned a whole lot about digital stuff that we never had intended to. Right. So that was sort of the premise, and the kernel was that the Windsor Symphony always has an education concert series that's wildly successful, where they invite kids to they play at what's called the Capitol Theater. It's a lovely historic building, and oftentimes the symphony will also go out to all of the elementary schools and perform. And so of course we couldn't do that in the pandemic, and so the symphony looked to me as their assistant conductor and said, well, what are we going to do for education? Maybe we'll just film an education concert and send it out that way. And I thought, well, why not make it something more important, something more impactful? And so we filmed the concert version, and I cut up each of the pieces. I edited all of the pieces and filmed all of these.
I was going to say, you didn't cut up Fred, did you?
I didn't cut up Fred. No, no. And I added in all of this artwork and a spectrogram, which basically mapped the sound on the screen. And I created two separate programs out of it. One was called Adding Up the Orchestra, which connected to numeracy, and the other was called Creating an Orchestral Fairy Tale, which linked to literacy. And the idea is that we wanted to help support teachers through the pandemic. And so each of these had 4 episodes, and the 5th was a Zoom Q&A with me, right? And so each episode built on the other, and built on either this concept of numeracy, adding up musicians, adding up volume, adding up all sorts of things, or creating an orchestral fairy tale. So at the end of it, they wrote their own fairy tale, right, listening to music.
What would you say if someone came to you and said, I think I want to be a conductor? I'm a musician, I play this, and this. What would be a key point of advice that you would say to that person?
Well, not to hit the nail on the head for your show, but I would say get a mentor. No, I'm serious. Right. In that every conductor has probably more than one, probably more than 5 mentors to thank for their career, for them becoming conductors, for them really growing as the artists that they need. So that would be my first piece of advice would be sit down with someone who's done it and just ask questions. Be curious. And from there, what you'll start learning okay, what are the physical things that I have to do with my body to practice this? Right. What are the musical things that I have to work on so that I'm able to stand up in front of these musicians and help show the why, right? And then the third piece is that you actually have to go out and do it. And the one thing that is different about being a conductor than just being a musician who plays in an orchestra is that someone who plays an instrument can go to a practice room and go practice by themselves for however many hours they want and won't come out of the practice room until it's ready. A conductor cannot do that. We can go practice the patterns all we want, the sort of physical coordination, and learn as much as we can about the music. But as soon as you get in front of people, it all changes. Because you have to respond to the people in the room, and it feels different in your body. It's a little like ballet dancers I've discovered have this sensation that they practice with recordings, and then when they get into a different space with the orchestra, they tell me it feels different in my body, and so I have to do it once to sort of just realign and readjust my body. Conducting is the same way. You can only practice it by doing it. And it's why conducting is actually considered the older you are, the more wiser you are in conducting, as we say, is that it just takes that repetition of actually doing it in person to become a real master at it. Now, of course, we have wunderkinds and all these youngsters like Klaus Michaela, who just won Chicago Symphony, and he's in his 20s still. He's definitely an outlier. He's just has the gift.
You're on the path of wisdom.
There we go. That's right.
How do you feel? Like, do you feel like?
I feel like I have more gray hairs than I ever have. Whether that's wisdom or stress is to be seen.
Right. But you feel like, are you on the path of like growing and changing and getting better every day? I mean, I hope you're getting better every day.
Yeah,
right? It can't get worse every day.
Well,
maybe Fred can.
Well, actually, two things. One is that artistic growth is often never linear. It's often not linear, meaning that some days you get better and then some days you have a dip, and that it's never I'm here and then I get here. It's always up and down. There are peaks and troughs, and so some days you are maybe not as good as you were the other day before, but that's because that's just how artistic growth works. Right. And for me, that's what also really drew me to conducting, is that I will never be done. I will never reach a point where I will say, I have made it. I understand this music. It's mine. I've got it. I will always be asking questions. I'll always be curious. I'll always be thinking about, is there a way that I can connect with these musicians to make them more successful? Right. And I think that was the big moment for me when I left teaching, because I reached that moment with teaching. I reached a moment of, I've got this. This is done. I'm good. And I went, that's a problem. I can't do that. I can't have that mindset for the next 30 years. Now, that was probably a little arrogant on my part to think that I had figured out teaching, because I definitely hadn't. But there was this, I didn't have that same sort of drive and that same sort of curiosity to continue sort of pulling at things that way that I did with conducting.
All right, let's talk about social media.
Okay.
Do you want to do a shout out for a site where people can find you, and how do you use that site for your own personal gains or whatever?
Of course. Well, it's a digital business card, right? That's how I consider it. So, of course, I have my website, danielwiley.com. Very easy, Wiley, a little like the coyote, and then, for me, my Facebook, Daniel Wiley Conductor, or my Instagram, which is the shortest, which is DBW14, is my Instagram handle. And I use that stuff. Well, actually, it's interesting. People ask me, "Oh, you on social media?" And I say, "Yeah, for work and for my father." He's keeping up with me, but also the things I post on there a lot of times are tailored for the audience that I'm gearing it towards. So I really am using it as a business tool rather than something that's just personal for me.
Right. Yeah, I like to post, things that are going on with me. It's just that it doesn't seem like it's that easy without all the other stuff that comes into your feed, and can be very depressing considering the state of things. If
Yes.
You know what I'm saying.
One of the reasons also that being an artist is a way of life for me is that when things are difficult and challenging, is that oftentimes art is the best way to remind us of our humanity and to give us hope.
I love that.
I know.
Oh.
Me too.
I feel like that's a perfect place to end.
Let's do it.
Yeah. I want to thank my guest, Daniel Wiley. And what was that website again?
DanielWiley.com.
Perfect. He is an amazing conductor, so check out his website. And also, I want to thank you for watching or listening to another episode of Man with a Mentor. This is Matt Barnard saying bye-bye.